Journalists reporting from the front lines or from conflict zones put themselves in harm's way on a daily basis. World Press of Freedom Day, commemorated earlier this month, highlighted the plight of journalists around the world. The arrest of Evan Gershkovich of the Wall Street Journal and the death of AFP's Arman Soldin in Ukraine is evidence of how dangerous it can be for media personnel to execute their duties. Hamilton Wende, winner of the 2022 National Press Club's Journalist of the Year Investigative Journalism Award, joins us in studio to share his incredible career reporting from the front line in Afghanistan, Iraq, Middle East. And I suppose the question, Hamilton, is where have you not reported from?
Well, I haven't been to Ukraine. That's one. I had a serious back op a few years ago, and I just don't feel that I should be going onto the front lines at this point. But I've reported all over the continent and all over our own country in South Africa. That's where I really started with conflict journalism back in 1984 when there was almost, you can call it an intifada against the apartheid regime that lasted until 1994 when we had our elections. So that's how I began.
So is it the desire to report on the truth? Is it a death wish, some might ask? What is it that has you in the very throes of bullets, guns, and all sorts of artillery, and being able to report, walk away alive, luckily, and go back?
Well, for me, partly it's circumstance. In 1984, actually, February 1985 was my first real kind of conflict situation. I was in Crossroads down in Cape Town. And I saw Kufut, which was the special police forces at the time, shooting 7 people dead.
Wow.
And I was a young sound man working as a 2-man BBC television crew. And the apartheid government at the time was saying that only 1 or maybe 3 people had been injured or killed. They were fudging their statements. We, on the 9 o'clock news on the BBC that night, showed 7 people being shot dead. So I learned very early on the importance of bearing witness and of being able to at least bring some level of truth to a chaotic and dangerous situation. But for me, it's not a death wish. It's definitely a desire to witness history and to bear witness. And sometimes it's circumstance. People phone and say, are you willing to do it? And we respect your expertise and your experience, and I will say yes.
Well, I imagine that it's got to be very rewarding. But on the flip side is the fact that you're a family man. How does all of that play into the work that you've been doing in the past?
Well, the most difficult thing was leaving my family to go and spend 2 embeds with the U.S. Marines in Afghanistan 10 years ago in 2012. And I had covered a number of wars before, including the Rwandan genocide, which is a whole issue on its own. And I didn't realize exactly that I wasn't going to be going to the front line in an armored vehicle and then going back to the hotel to edit footage. I was going to walk for 17 days with the U.S. Marines through Helmand province, wow, being ambushed sometimes up to 3 or 4 times a day by the Taliban or forces allied to the Taliban. And leaving my family, I was doing it for career reasons. I'm also a freelancer, so it was a very good opportunity. It was for National Geographic, which I've never had the opportunity to work for again, although I would love to, and maybe it will happen. But I knew it was almost a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. But it was very difficult leaving the family behind.
So let's talk about the emotions, because when you're out there in the front lines, you're obviously in contact with death a lot more often than you would like.
Yeah, that's difficult. One of the most salient and important things is I'm not carrying a gun. I'm not shooting anybody. I'm not asked to shoot anybody. So there is a privilege there, the privilege of being the witness, not necessarily the participant. And I'm conscious of that because I also have deep respect for the psychological paradoxes that many soldiers go through. I'm not a soldier. So that does put you at one remove from the brutality of war. And I think it's really, for me, very important and very rewarding to be able to come back and say, you know, I did something different. I told something that matters to the world at large. And that's what keeps me going.
Well, 11 May, we commemorated the death of Al Jazeera journalist Shireen Abu Akleh, who wasn't so lucky and obviously shot amidst the turmoil of war. your reaction to that, and obviously the dangers. You're not always protected. It's not always about he's a journalist and potentially has a white flag, so let's leave him alone.
Absolutely not. And the frightening thing is that this kind of things happens at the most unexpected times. You were asking me off air what was one of my most dangerous times. Well, the most dangerous time was when I was clearly singled out. I was wearing all khaki. I wasn't wearing military uniform, but I looked perhaps like a soldier from a distance. And some sniper in Afghanistan clearly singled me out in an empty field, and the rounds were cracking over my head. Wow. And I was running as fast as I could, which wasn't very fast, carrying armored plating, helmets. And yeah, that was very dangerous. One of the other most dangerous times was a completely kind of, anonymous is the wrong word, but unimportant time. We were walking through a village in Afghanistan, and mortar rounds came in, and one landed not a very long distance in front of me, and a huge plume of dust and mud and shrapnel blew up in front of me, and I could have died, and no one would have even remembered the name of the village. And that happens to people, to many journalists.
Now, we have to ask, how do you navigate the fine line between reporting on accurate versus unbiased information? Because obviously, as a human being, you have a sentiment around certain issues, right? And you are expected, I'd imagine, to report them as truthfully as humanly possible.
Of course. Now, one of the things about war reporting is you can't cross the line, so you can't always get a quote from both sides. Your headquarters back in Johannesburg or New York or London may be able to get that quote, but if, for example, you're on the front lines with the Ukrainian troops, there's no possible way you can ask the Russian troops what they might think or what their experience is. And the same goes, I always talk about when I was on a small military police operation, actually, in Burundi. And I was effectively embedded with the Burundian army. And, we couldn't speak to the rebels. So it is a problem. You have to do the best you can to report what you see and answer the 5 W's and the H: who, what, when, where, why, and how. And use those as your basic tools.
Now, based on your experiences and observations, what can be done to enhance the protection of journalists out in dangerous environments?
Wow, that's a difficult question. A tremendous amount depends on the combatant's attitude towards the media. Strangely enough, I was thinking about it on the way here. In Africa, journalists are often given some kind, I wouldn't know if respect is the right word, but are not targeted necessarily. Whereas in other places, I know that journalists have been deliberately targeted. Certainly in South Africa.
Is it because of whom they represent and the views of that particular media house or news agency?
Well, yes, that's also a complex issue because it's as much a problem of expression as it is a problem of perception. So, for example, when I was in Butare in Rwanda, a number of people on the Hutu extremist side came up to us. I was with the BBC London team and started screaming at us in French, which I only speak very little of. And it turned out they didn't like something on the BBC French Africa service, which I had no idea what was said or who was saying it or why they were saying it. So their perception was that we were saying something that they didn't like. I couldn't change that perception. So what you would do to protect people, I think journalists themselves have to be conscious of not taking risks and of not being foolish about where they go. That being said, very often, as I said earlier, it's the unexpected bullet that can get you. As one ex-combatant once told me, don't worry about the bullet that's got your name on it. You can't change that. Worry about the bullet that's got "to whom it may concern" written on it.
Hamilton Wende, former BBC journalist, author and TV producer. Appreciate your time.